welcome in to the Cover 5 show. I am your host, Jordan Vanek. You can find me on Twitter at Jordan Vanek DFS. This is my co-host, Mark Garcia. You can find him on Twitter at HiloFF. How are you doing today, Hilo?
I'm doing so good, man. And I think that you're having a pretty good day too, because you just announced that your health stuff is looking on the up and up. So shout out to that dude. Health is important. So excited to hear that from you, man.
Yeah, appreciate it. You know, it's been a little stressful week, but now we are here to talk some wide receivers and tight ends. The way the show is going to work today is me and Hilo pick two guys in certain price ranges from DraftKings' this pricing, and we are just going to talk about them either in a positive way, negative way, just some early thoughts on the slate. It's a little ways away right now, so it's not our concrete, this is where we feel thoughts, but these are things that you need to start thinking about as we enter week one and leave our fantasy football drafts. Speaking of fantasy football drafts, Josh has his rankings on the site. You have Ryan's power rankings for some betting index stuff. And just overall, you got some preseason recaps from Hilo. We got Marcus Morsher, who's been writing some stuff. We have a ton of content on the 3013.com that you guys need to check out and read into and get prepared for this upcoming year. As always, try to subscribe to the YouTube page. We're trying to grow this fantasy side of things, and that is very, very important. But let's get into it, Hilo. Tell me about your first pick, who I am hoping to be picking 5th overall in my redraft league tonight.
Yeah, man, that's Cooper Kupp. So Cooper Kupp is an interesting study, and it goes a little bit beyond like this man catch pass, this man score points. Yeah, he does that, but it's also this kind of like overall state of the slate and what's going on behind the scenes with the psychological aspects associated with Cooper Kupp. I'm going to be looking to play him or fit him into rosters as I don't know the rate, but above field for sure on week one DFS. One, obviously Cooper Kupp has missed time in camp preseason with that hamstring injury. Two, the psychological aspect of the hangover from last year with this Seattle defense. And I think a lot of the top level analysis is like they suppressed wide receiver scoring against them. While true, in actuality, they filtered more work over the middle of the field based on the defensive front that they play. That's kind of where Cooper Kupp eats. I'd expect they're going to utilize him heavily in the slants and the crossing patterns, the more so routes over the middle of the field that are designed with upside in mind still. Still allow Cooper Kupp. So he's not running like shallow crossers. He's not running like lining up next off the tight end and running like a crosser to the sideline. No, he's like running these like between the second and the third layer, behind the linebackers, in front of the safeties, type upside generating routes. And if he can leverage one of those into one of these long touchdowns that we've seen out of him over the previous couple of seasons, I think he's an interesting play on this slate because of the negative psychological aspects that are associated with him and the fact that this game, we talked about it on last week's session, this game is a top 3 expected game environment, but of the 3, it's probably going to get some of the lower exposure, or the field is going to be keyed in on this Seattle and Rams game less than when you compare it to like Cincinnati and the Browns. And then obviously the game of the week is expected to be the Dolphins and the Chargers. So all of that kind of comes in with like, where do we expect the field to allocate salary? What are the game environments, the state of the slate, all those things, the psychological aspects. I think Cooper Kupp is a very, very interesting play in week one.
Yeah, I love Cooper Kupp at 8,400. I think there's like a few guys in the NFL right now where if they're ever below 9,000, you have to at least consider it. Cooper Kupp, Christian McCaffrey are the two guys for me every single week where the upside they have from catching passes and just doing things after the catch, the way that they get utilized in some of their offenses, maybe not so much now that McCaffrey is in San Francisco and they've got a lot of mouths to feed, but Cooper Kupp's the only player on this team that I am confident in getting every single touch possible. And on the flip side, their defense is just, it's scary. And you see that game total. You see the way that Seattle has made additions to the offensive side of the ball. Even though JSN is most likely going to be out with that broken hand, I still expect them to score a ton of points against this Rams defense that is Aaron Donald and a bunch of players that are very young and need to develop and aren't ready to compete at that elite level right now. But completely agree with the Cooper Kupp stance. For me, in this 7K range, the guy that I look at in a similar uncertainty aspect is Jamar Chase. In preseason, the Bengals are a very quiet team right now because Joe Burrow had that calf strain, and ever since then, it's not they're just not as popular as they have been in years past. They're not the team that, oh, well, they just went to the Super Bowl. They're the team that lost an AFC championship, now has their quarterback hurt. As long as Joe Burrow gets a week or so of practice in, it'll be wheels up for Jamar Chase against a Jim Schwartz defense. Jim Schwartz loves to run single high coverages. Jamar Chase against single high coverage is one of the most elite players in the NFL. I tend to avoid Jamar Chase when he's in situations where they have two safeties deep. The Browns, with their previous defensive coordinator, Joe Woods, used a lot of two safety looks. Jim Schwartz, that's not his MO. And from what I've seen in preseason, I'm watching him send cover 0 on 3rd and 5s in the first quarter of preseason games. I expect him to want to get after Burrow and make him uncomfortable, which just hasn't proven to be successful in the NFL so far. I think this is a game where Burrow can get sacked 4 or 5 times, but still throw for over 300 yards because of the explosive plays from Jamar Chase. I think he has a chance to break the slate in week 1. And for me, that is all I want out of him and my Burrow stacks. Hopefully he comes in a little lower roster just because of Burrow's calf injury and that uncertainty. How do you feel about Jamar Chase?
Yeah, I think the where you kind of started that discussion with kind of where Jamar Chase excels as a player, his archetype, what he does. I mean, yeah, Jamar Chase against single high or a single safety deep. Yeah, that's a recipe for he can beat you anywhere. He can beat you on the perimeter. He can beat you over the middle of the field. He can beat you on all kinds of stuff against that look. So yeah, that's a good shout.
Yeah, no, I think last year and last 2 years, he's run the most 9 routes in the NFL. And I think he has over 1,000 of his total yards on 9 routes. Could be a little bit skewed, might be like 800 or 700 yards or so, but he has the most yards on 9 routes, which is your vertical, your go routes in the NFL over the last 2 years. So kick it to you for the next player, which you're keeping in the same game.
Yeah, it's kind of that same discussion. And that player is DK Metcalf. I'm really, really drawn to this game environment. And I was even before the injury to JSN. And now, so that we can expect a concentrated pass funnel offense on each side of this game, I'm even more so now. So, yeah, like DK Metcalf, may potentially mixing in some Tyler Lockett. I didn't list him because I didn't want to go too much from this game on players to discuss from week 1. But yeah, we can expect it, like you mentioned with this Rams defense. It's like Aaron Donald and a bunch of guys we don't know their name still. The fact that their defense has gotten worse, but that was kind of more or less the makeup of their defense last year as well. They wanted to very, very key in on stopping the run, and then play different aspects and conceptual stuff behind that. Well, this year it's like they still have Aaron Donald to handle the run, but behind that, we have no idea what's going to happen. So, yeah, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, those types, and this game environment as a whole. I think when we talked about earlier, this idea of like targeting game environments that have the potential to blow up into something that like you had to have, and or you were not winning a GPP, like save caching. We're not talking about this. So it's like all balls to the wall, win or go home. Which is kind of what we're doing in even single entry GPPs. We're trying to win. Targeting those game environments that are, one, not likely to be the top ownership on the week. Again, that's probably going to be the Chargers and the Dolphins, but have the pieces to blow it out of the water if it really breaks right. And I think both of these offenses kind of do. One side you got Sean McVay, and the other side you have the 9th-year breakout quarterback that everyone's drafting in the 10th round, Geno Smith. But yeah, this game environment, I think, is really, really interesting. And from a theoretical perspective of like, where's the field likely to go? I think it's likelier that we have like a roster construction that consists of like one pay up wide receiver, one mid range, and one pay down, because that's kind of where the volume or the value is for week one, which is like kind of players are priced low across the board. So you can fit some interesting pieces from different areas. And I think players are going to want to kind of try and do that. So on one side, it's like we're likelier to see fewer rosters in play with 2 pay up options at wide receiver. And we're likelier to see if they are from this, like Tyreek Hill's and your Keenan Allen's in the mid range or Mike Williams in the mid range from that other game environment.
See, you brought up Keenan Allen, and for me, this is the next guy that I was actually going to get into. And the reason is he's in an awkward price range for his ceiling. So
Yeah.
Keenan Allen is not a player that I am expecting. I think me and you have talked about this on previous podcasts where he's not the player you always need to get to break the slate. Like you can avoid a Keenan Allen 24-point DraftKings day and still win your contest. And for Keenan Allen, 24 points is not his ceiling per se, but it's something that if he put up 24 points, that's 10 for 110, and you get the 3-point bonus on DraftKings. That sounds like a Keenan Allen day. Like for him, between him and like Jamar Chase's ceiling is like 50. Keenan Allen, I think his ceiling weeks will be around 35-ish, and that's with a touchdown guaranteed. You have to get that for him. And in this game and in this particular situation, if you do want to target it, I'm not saying to get to Keenan Allen. I think out of the pass catching options with Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Jalen Waddle, I think he's going to be the lowest rostered because of that ceiling type outcome. And you have Mike Williams, who's 5,700, who's the big play threat, the guy that if you had to bet on the likelihood of either of them going for 100 yards, he's probably going to have better odds to do it. Keenan Allen will probably have the higher over-under in general just because of his consistency and the way that he gets utilized. And then you have this influx of Kellen Moore, who's talked about like he wants to throw it down the field more. Like Keenan Allen's going to have to be a part of it. Doesn't necessarily mean his ceiling's going to increase, but for this game in particular, I have some interest just because out of that pass catching group, I think he is the lowest rostered of the 4. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that's valid across the board.
Okay,
nothing really to add.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, again, Keenan Allen's not someone I'm in love with. We got a few weeks away, but that wraps up the 7K range breakdown. Just to give you a quick look at that range. Now we're going to be picking guys from 5,000 to 6,900. Hilo, you got a guy that has a new quarterback, and I put him in my lineup unconfidently. And now that you want to talk about him, I'm here interested to see what you have to say.
Yeah, we talked about this dude when we did that first lineup breakdown. But Mike Evans is the guy. This is an interesting, similar I guess it's similar in nature to the discussion of the overall game environment of Seattle and the Rams, in that this is a guy with significant amounts of negative biases against him to enter this season. When we look at like what Mike Evans has excelled at in his career, he's excelled at body positioning. He's excelled at winning on the perimeter. He's excelled against man coverages and everybody that's not named Marshawn Lattimore. It's like everyone else that has kind of tried to man on man him, he's kind of handled. And now we get on the opposite side of this game in Minnesota. We have a defensive coordinator change where we expect the Vikings to transition from this very, very prevent type defense and playing a lot of quarters, playing a lot of too high looks to this now more aggressive. They're going to expect to be coming after you. They're going to leave perimeter wide receivers in one-on-one coverage at an increased rate. And I think that could, when we talk about like embracing additional variance because we're shooting for top end range of outcomes, Mike Evans is a guy who has 50-point upside. I mean, he did it last year, 51-pointer in week 17 or whatever it was. Yes, the quarterback is different, but the environment that could breed upside, I think, is there and present for Mike Evans in week 1.
You just had to kick the Panthers, man. You just had to mention.
Yeah. A little under the table, a little poking at you. Dude.
Yeah. You know, but he's not going up against CJ Henderson this week. But I will say, I do fully believe into that aspect of things where Mike Evans, it doesn't take much, man. I don't think Chris Godwin is going to be a great DraftKings asset this year just because of the inconsistencies of Baker Mayfield. However, for Mike Evans, he doesn't need to have 15, 18 targets in a game. He just needs to get the one down the field, which is what Mike Evans has done throughout his entire career, which is how he
Yeah.
gets 1,000 yards every single season. That's the way. And against this Vikings defense, I agree with you. I think that the big play and the way to get different, if you are targeting that Dolphins Chargers game, is a Mike Evans who's in an awkward price range and has the upside to be a 30-point scorer at sub probably 5% rostered in most of your contests. So
Yeah,
I
and
do.
one thing I didn't mention also is like looking at the depth chart and kind of what my Minnesota's defense is. Like they went out and got Byron Murphy, who's expected to be this kind of like um, transitional safety slash nickel kind of cover, like a big nickel, a small safety type kind of guy over the middle of the field. He's gonna be like nut with oh my God, I
Mike
just mentioned his
Evans?
name, Chris Godwin,
No, Chris Godwin.
over the
Yeah.
middle of the field. They are going to
Yeah.
have a rookie on the perimeter, and they're going to have a Caleb Evans on the other side, most likely to start for perimeter corners. So if I'm the if I'm the Buccaneers, it's like where am I most likely going with the football when I'm passing? It's like I'm most likely targeting the running back through the air, and I'm most likely targeting Mike Evans. So a lot is kind of lining up that I don't know Mike Evans kind of has some ceiling that we should not be just overlooking.
I completely agree. I don't know how much I'm going to get to him just because I'm a single 3 entry max player, but if you're
Yeah.
150ing, I would be slightly over the field with a guy like Mike Evans just because of the obviously you talk about range of outcomes. I mention it more towards like just the ceiling that he has is the way that you can win your GPPs. But
Yeah.
moving forward to a guy that I've been touting all off season, he is officially getting into the spot where in drafts, I don't know if I'm going to get them this year just
Yeah.
because he's going so much earlier than he was in June. And that is Calvin Ridley of the Jacksonville Jaguars. I have another receiver in this price range that I love that I'll get to soon, but Calvin in this matchup against the Colts is prime for success. Usually when you make this big acquisition throughout the year or the offseason, you want to target them heavily in week one.
Mm-hmm.
I expect DJ Moore to get those targets as well, just as a guy who got traded for. Not going to be talking about him here, but for Calvin, he's going to get work down the field against this Colts secondary that features a lot of rookie corners. They lost a guy for the whole season because of a suspension. Kenny Moore is going to go to the slot and travel with Christian Kirk, which leaves Juju Brents, who's a rookie corner out of Kansas State, one-on-one with Calvin Ridley, who's going to be playing in, again, his first regular season football game in over 2 years. I understand all of the negatives around that idea that he could necessarily be rusty, but he's had the full offseason. He looks the part. He looks comfortable. And in this game, if he's getting a rookie to line up with him, what better way to get him involved, get him down the field, and get that connection going? The only concern I have in this game is the Jaguars' offensive line. However, the Colts' defensive line is not necessarily one I am afraid of entirely. Me and you talked earlier. I remember stacking Trevor Lawrence in my first lineup. You got me the idea that this Anthony Richardson swinging with maybe Alec Pierce, who we'll get to later, and playing Calvin will be the way to go. And for me, you talked about the Seattle Rams environment. I completely agree. I love that environment as well. This one is one that I think is going under the radar just because of the fact that it's divisional game, Colts Jaguars hasn't been the games that people have been targeting or touting, but this one I think can be another sneaky shootout in this one. How do you feel?
Yeah, yeah, no. I mean, last time we talked about like potentially gaining exposure to the Jacksonville pass offense through Anthony Richardson, much cheaper. With the thinking being that based on coaching tendencies, the Jags are less likely to open up on their own, likely going
Yeah.
to need to be pushed. So yeah, I think that's an interesting way to attack that game environment with bringing it back with Calvin Ridley instead of him stacked up with the quarterback there.
But let's move forward to guys. The team's gotten a lot of negative publicity, which leads you to want to stack them. This is one of the people you didn't have in your stack, but you were interested in the quarterback, and they just had a recent injury in the wide receiver room.
Yeah, dude, that's Cortland Sutton. And I want to talk about, if it's okay with you, I want to talk about Cortland Sutton, Marvin Mims, and Greg Dulcich all in one kind of discussion.
That's fine.
Spoiler alert, all three of those guys are on this list for me to talk about today. But I want to kind of tackle it and talk about all the different aspects that are at play. It's like, obviously, the field is going to be keyed in on this offense now that is expected to be rather concentrated. They've lost Tim Patrick, they've lost KJ Hamler, they now are going to start the season without Jerry Jeudy. And so this pass offense is going to be very interesting. They're also expected to more or less limit Javonte to start the season. If we take the most recent reports coming out of Camp Denver at face value. So that kind of slims down this target tree for this team entering the season. It's like Samaje Perine, it's the two tight ends, Greg Dulcich and Trotman. And then it's like Marvin Mims, the rookie, the speedster, the guy's going to be working downfield, and Cortland Sutton, who's going to be playing that X-type wide receiver role. From a macro perspective, I would expect the Broncos, knowing Sean Payton, to want to get their best playmakers on the field. Clearly, that is primarily out of 11 personnel when all three of those players are healthy, Marvin Mims, Jerry Jeudy, and Cortland Sutton. They're not entering the season. So I would expect them to run some more heavy sets. And because they do not want to overwork Javonte to start the season, I think that's going to be a lot of 12 personnel with Adam Trotman and Greg Dulcich on the field together. So whereas like Cortland Sutton and Marvin Mims are extremely good on paper plays from a point per dollar perspective, from a theoretical perspective, probably my favorite target from this side of this game is Greg Dulcich, because he's landsliding down draft boards and best ball because of preseason usage. Adam Trotman is more or less the every down tight end in Denver right now, with Dulcich playing on clear passing downs. But if we think about like what Sean Payton is likely to do here, I would expect both of those guys to be on the field at a fairly significant rate. And Greg Dulcich is kind of this like forgotten man in this picture. So yeah, play Marvin Mims at bare minimum 3K for sure. Cortland Sutton, very, very interesting in this mid-range at just 5,200. Greg Dulcich is interesting because not only is he kind of has this like poo-poo cloud around him right now based on preseason usage and all that stuff, but he's priced at 4K, which is like a lot of people are going to be very, very uncomfortable paying up to get Dulcich, who is kind of now the second tier tight end in this offense, playing primarily passing downs. So yeah, it's interesting. The most interesting guy to me there is actually Greg Dulcich.
That is a fun way to wrap up those Broncos pass catchers. I'll add my little tidbits as we get through, just to kind of quickly go through those guys. For me, Cortland Sutton is a really good play just because of the product of he's going to get a lot of targets. Like, there is no question that he is the alpha in this receiver room now, with Jerry Jeudy dealing with a hamstring injury. I do not anticipate him being back. His price, like, he asked, what was his price? His price is 5,200. For him to 3x, he's got to get 16, 17. Like, that's a very easy way for him to do it, pay off his salary. And he obviously has the upside to score in the 20s just because of the usage that should be expected. I'll be like, for me, I'll be playing, getting exposure to them. I'm just really intrigued to see the prices, or sorry, the rostership projections as these guys come through, just because how popular they are will be the determinant of who I'm going to be getting to. I do believe Dulcich will be the lowest of the three. But moving forward to my next guy, again, a guy that I touted all season, 6,500, Chris Olave, same price as Calvin Ridley. When I saw both of them being the same price, I just plugged them both in my lineup and started trying to build from there. Chris Olave is in a situation against one of the worst secondaries in football in the Tennessee Titans. They gave up a ton of air yards last year. He's paired with a quarterback in Derek Carr that was top 10 in on target throws of 10 plus yards down the field. You remember watching Devontae Adams having this great season in terms of yardage, but really low receptions for what he produced from a yardage standpoint. It was because he was getting the ball down the field a lot. Chris Olave is going to be the deep threat for this team. He's going to work the intermediate portion of the field. And yes, Michael Thomas is there, but Chris Olave is the best receiver in this room. Again, the Titans are a team where they're going to give up a lot of plays down the field. The Saints are going to throw the ball down the field, and Chris Olave is going to be on the other end of it. This is a pretty simple Chris Olave is a play. I expect him to be a little bit popular. I will probably buy into him, even if he is one of the more popular players on the slate. And I see the next guy that you have is in this exact same situation of a guy that gets it done down the field. So I'll let you take it away with the Saints' third receiver, by the way. Third.
Yeah. we're down to the sub 5K pricing tier. And yeah, it's a guy from the same team, being Rashid Shaheed. My only concern, and I think Chris Olave is a great on paper play. My only concern would be with the offensive play calling tendencies that we've seen out of New Orleans, that he might have to get there on 7-8 targets. We might not see this like he very well could put up 102 on 7-8 targets in this matchup, in this spot. But I think it's a more thin needle to have to thread when you compare to other guys that are around his price range. And my way to kind of leverage that and get still exposure to this game is like Rashid Shaheed, who is the wide receiver 3, who's likely to get maybe 4 to 6 targets, but can put up 101 on those at a much lower price point, is a potential way to go about that. And when we're down here in this price range, it's all about ceiling. We're not looking for a guy who can 3X. We're not looking for a guy who can get you 11 points. That's not the point of this part of the pricing tier. Like, we need players that are putting up 20, 25 points, that are keeping you on pace to win a GPP. And so I think Rashid Shaheed is an interesting name. We mentioned Marvin Mims earlier, who's my other guy down here in this tier. Those guys who can put up 20, 25 points on 4 to 6, 5 to 7 targets type thing, because of who they are archetypically as players, and what they can do in those matchups.
I agree that Rashid Shaheed can get it done down the field. I think every time he scored a touchdown, I've played a different Saints player.
Yeah,
so
that's who he is, man.
He's number 22. So it's like it always hurts. It never feels good watching him score a long touchdown, because you don't know that it is in fact Rashid Shaheed until they put his name up there. Remember watching him in his first play out there, and he caught like a 60-yard bomb, and I'm like, who is that?
Who did that?
Who just did that in that game? That's pretty crazy for me. But I know we put 3 to 5K. We're supposed to probably be under 5K. I felt like we needed to touch on this guy just because Jahan Dotson is now in a spot where you see it in preseason. Sam Howell does not want to throw the ball 2 yards down the field. It doesn't work for him. He just doesn't think he's allowed to do it. I feel like he sees people wide open underneath and chooses to scramble around for the extra few seconds and then launch the ball. Jahan Dotson was a great rookie. He didn't get to showcase all of his talents because he plays behind a great receiver in Terry McLaurin in a situation that wasn't exactly good last year. But now they have Eric Bieniemy, who's probably going to bring in some of the flavor from Kansas City. They don't have Travis Kelce. So what does that tell me? It tells me they're going to go to an offense that's working the ball down the field like they have with Tyreek Hill and obviously Sammy Watkins and some of the Demarcus Robinson, some of the receivers they've had there. Obviously in a different way, because you can't do it the same way with Tyreek Hill and Patrick Mahomes as you're going to do with Sam Howell and Jahan Dotson. But Jahan Dotson at 5K in a game where they're playing the Cardinals, who just are giving away players at this point, just trading away Isaiah Simmons for free. They extended Budda Baker, but I'm not sure he still wants to be there as much because he just took it because of the money that they're throwing at him, and probably the idea that he's not exactly a valuable asset as a high-paid safety in today's NFL. But overall, this is a spot where Jahan Dotson at 5K is like one of the best values on the slate. He's probably going to be the most popular cash receiver, and he should be.
Yeah.
I don't have anything really negative to say outside. He's just going to be really, really popular. But I think his floor in the way that they're utilizing him as a receiver, I know receivers supposed to have a lower floor just because of the fact of the volatility of the position, but feels like what? 4 for 60 is his floor, 2xing. Like, he's
Yeah.
gonna get the deep looks, and he's talented enough, and he's gonna work these Cardinals corners. And I believe that he has a ceiling to score over 25 in this game, just because Terry McLaurin's out. How do you feel about Dotson?
Yeah, this is I don't know what that noise is in the background. Sorry. This I think it's Jets, dude. Let's go. I got Jets flying over. Yeah, this is an interesting offense, an interesting setup because now the offense moves from like this offense that's likely to be focused around Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin is probably going to be sitting for week 1 with that turf toe injury. So yeah, Jahan Dotson just makes too much sense. There's a guy that is not on my sheet that is super interesting to me. Well, I'll bring him up in the cheap tight ends section because he's a cheap tight end. Spoiler alert. From this team. But yeah, it's like, how is this offense likely to be built without Terry McLaurin? It's probably that, their primary intermediate to deep guy is Jahan Dotson, with Curtis Samuel working short to intermediate, and then the tight ends kind of being an interesting discussion that we'll have here shortly. I don't really have anything negative to say about Jahan Dotson here.
He's one of those guys that, again, he's just at a great low price in a spot where he's now the number 1 in the alpha in an offense that wants to push the ball down the field, which is always good for your wide receivers in DFS, especially in GPPs. Your next receiver was going to be Marvin Mims.
Mm-hmm.
You've already touched on him. Marvin Mims is one of the best deep route runners that we have had coming out of college from a statistical standpoint. A lot of his touchdowns came from it. A lot of his yards came from it. That is what he did for the Oklahoma Sooners. And if Dylan Gabriel was a little bit more accurate, he probably would have even had a bigger year than he's had in last season. Mims is a guy that I expect to win deep in this league, win deep on the sidelines, and gain the trust of Russell Wilson. I was thinking about this comparison as you mentioned, Courtland Sutton. It's like they're a lesser, like a younger, or I guess not a younger, but a lesser DK Metcalf Tyler Lockett combo, where Mims isn't going to necessarily work inside, but he's going to work like the deep DK type routes. And then Courtland Sutton might work towards, like, similarly the way Tyler Lockett plays. They're just flipped in body types and just the way they archetype as players. But Mims can catch that long touchdown. I don't think you need to add anything else. Do you?
Nope.
Perfect. So speaking of long touchdown, this guy has gotten the deep target in every preseason game that he has played with Anthony Richardson. That is Alec Pierce. This guy is going to win down the field for his team. He's going to win on 9 routes. They're going to utilize a lot of play action. And with Anthony Richardson, regardless of if Jonathan Taylor's in the backfield, you have to respect his legs. So it's probably going to be more of like a read option type play where Alec Pierce is working a post, which is what he did, or a crosser, I should say, which is what he did in the game last night. Wasn't completed because the Eagles were in too high and they just bottled it up. But regardless, these are the looks that you're going to get with Alec Pierce, especially from Anthony Richardson. Pierce is one of the better 9 route players in the NFL. Last season, I believe he averaged over 2 yards per route run on these routes, which is top 12 in the NFL of guys that ran at least 50 of these specific routes. You have Shane Steichen. When he came over from Philly, the 2 routes that Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown dominated on were 9 routes. A.J. Brown, I believe, led the NFL on them. He had a ton of touchdowns. Jalen Hurts had a lot of his passing touchdowns come from these routes. This is the way the Colts are going to create big plays. Week 1 against the Jaguars, I think the opportunity will be there. Tyson Campbell's probably going to travel with Michael Pittman, which is the matchup they want to get into. And when Alec Pierce is on secondary corners, Anthony Richardson should look to him deep. But that is one of my, sub 4K guys that I'll be getting to in my lineups, especially in those Anthony Richardson stacks. Do you have anybody else you want to touch on before we move on to tight ends?
No, sir. Let's do it.
Perfect. So tight ends, the way we split it up, we did 4,500 and up and then 4,500 and down. And Mark Andrews obviously had to pick the guy that I've been fading all offseason. So you can kick it away with your Mark Andrews love, dude.
I wore purple just for this instance. No, I'm just kidding. Mark Andrews, I think people are trying to be right on Mark Andrews this year. You have your guys who are buying into the yeah, exactly. You have your I can't even with you, bro. No, you have like your side of the equation where it's like, okay, it's like that bell curve where it's like the 98% in the middle are like, these are the reasons why Mark Andrews will fail. It's like the guy on the left who is not mentally gifted, who is saying like, um, catch football, lots of targets equals good. You have the like guy who's the I don't know, top 1% in intellectual abilities, who's like, guy catch football, lots of targets equals good. So I think there's this interesting discussion with Mark Andrews in the sense that like we expect that he might not play as many slot snaps because the offense is likely going to be moving more towards 11 personnel base, whereas over the past 5 seasons they've been first or second in heavy rate, being 21 and 12 personnel. So how does that influence the makeup of the offense? Like obviously Mark Andrews doesn't have that many or as many opportunities to play out of the slot. My answer is it might not matter. If we get increase to volume from the offense as a whole, there's 3 primary places where that volume is likely to go in my mind. It's still Mark Andrews up top. Then it's Rashad Bateman, who is still in my mind the alpha wide receiver in this offense. And then it's Zay Flowers. Odell Beckham at this stage in his career, what he can do, likely going to have some splashy plays because that's who he is, but he's likely not going to be this like volume type wide receiver week in, week out, because of what I think they're going to ask him to do in Todd Monken's offense. So you have Zay Flowers, who's probably, if Zay Flowers, different ways to look at this, but if Zay Flowers does not get the snap rate that we expect, it's going to benefit Mark Andrews. If he does, and Mark Andrews is playing more in line, then we're likely to see those two work in some sort of chip and go type offensive route running, where it's probably going to be layered over the middle of the field, Zay working deeper or Mark Andrews working deeper. I don't know. However, they're going to generate those mismatches. Both of those guys together, highly, highly interesting. Then you have Bateman on the outside, who's extending the field in the vertical. He is working downfield. He is going to have some splash plays. He's likely going to finish close to Zay Flowers for like the most targets out of the Ravens this year. All that discussion is like, because I think the field is just trying to be right on Mark Andrews. It's like a full fade or I'm all in. And this is stemming from like best ball. And not necessarily that that's wrong, but my mind doesn't work necessarily in that binary fashion when I'm analyzing situations. That's why I went through that like 5-minute spiel on what I expect of the Ravens this year. If the field is trying to be right, I'll just be like, I'll go to the extreme. Good player, catch passes, score touchdowns equals good. And I think if you're playing Mark Andrews, the very, very easy way to do it is to stack him up Lamar Jackson, potentially add in Zay Flowers or Rashad Bateman for week 1, and just play to the uncertainty in this offense before the field does.
So,
yeah.
All right. Me, I am the fader of Mark Andrews. I am one that thinks that the 3 wide receiver sets are going to hurt. And a lot of people point to the 2021 year for Andrews. What they fail to ever discuss is that the Ravens were top 10 in passing attempts and number 4 in dropbacks. They dropped back like 730 times that year. I do not anticipate the high pass rate to be 730 dropbacks. The defense is not going to be giving up 300 yards to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. It's a lot of different scenarios for the Baltimore Ravens, which is why I'm fading Mark Andrews in the 2nd round, 3rd round of fantasy drafts, where I have seen him go. I think he is a fine late 3rd round pick. I think everybody's starting to catch up to Darren Waller. It was the time of the tweet, the time of me fading Mark Andrews as heavily as I have been, was when there was a 4 to 5 round gap between him and Darren Waller, and I felt like their upsides are just the same. I think Darren Waller is still going to out-target Mark Andrews in this upcoming season for what it's worth. But in this week 1 particular matchup, it's going to be an interesting case study for where is DeMeco Ryans' defense at. So when he was in San Francisco, they ran a lot of 3 safety looks instead of bringing in the slot corner. They had Huafunga kind of playing this like in the box type role, and it allowed for a lot of success. When they met up with the Chiefs, they had no answer for Kelsey. They didn't. It was just not a part of the game plan. there is an easy route for this Texans team to not have an answer for Mark Andrews, because Mark Andrews is a good player, and the Texans they're in a rebuild. They're working on their talent. They're not the 49ers defense. However, the one area of the field I think the Texans are actually pretty strong is at safety. Jimmy Ward's there, Jalen Petre's there, and then they have a mixture of, they have a slot corner, I believe, in Desmond King. And in this scenario, when you have two high looks, Mark Andrews is probably going to be the guy for Lamar Jackson. That's has been his bread and butter throughout his career. A lot of teams play this quarters coverage against Lamar Jackson. And if you want to know your quarters coverage, check back to one of the podcasts we did with Cody Alexander. He explained this in detail at a very high level and it got me to be informed on the fact that quarters allows your eyes to be on the backfield.
Mm-hmm.
It's a zone coverage scheme. It's obviously the safeties are in a weird spot. And with Lamar Jackson, he loves throwing down the field. So you're in quarters, you're an umbrella, you're keeping everything in front of you. So this could be Andrews working that middle of the field. In this week 1 matchup, I am not full fading Mark Andrews because of those uncertainties and that it is a building block throughout. In my fantasy football drafts, I have not been in love with Mark Andrews. I know, Hilo, you're the big Mark Andrews guy. I have my roommate who's seen you pick him in multiple drafts. So, just saying, I know you don't
You got
agree
the
with my
receipts,
take.
bro. Yeah, you got the receipts.
But I do believe that in this game, like the Texans, they run too high coverage. Mark Andrews is usually the guy against too high. So I would be getting to him. But moving to one of my guys throughout the offseason, that fun fact, I am fading in week 1 is TJ Hawkinson. Tampa Bay Buccaneers do not run the too high shell that I want TJ Hawkinson to go up against. They ran it last year when they had nobody in their secondary. This year, their defense is healthy. Vance Joseph has someone new in the offensive side of the room. So I think he's going to hopefully take back some of the defensive side of things that, or not Vance Joseph, sorry, Todd Bowles, the defensive side of things that he has going on there. And in this matchup with the Minnesota Vikings, I think it's a Jay Jettas game. I think it's Jordan Addison. I think they're going to get the receivers more involved, especially with TJ Hawkinson's recent flare up with his back injury that I just remembered. I haven't heard anything about him missing week 1, but even if he plays, this is a spot where I'm not paying up for tight end much in this matchup, but I will be targeting some of the Vikings pass catchers against this Tampa Bay defense because they give you a lot of single high looks, and Jordan Addison, Jay Jettas, and even KJ Osborne will have some advantages against some of the corners in the way that they play, where it's a physical brand of football. But if you get by their physicality at the line of scrimmage, you're usually winning deep. And if you want an example of this, go look at Tyreek Hill a few years ago when before they met up in the Super Bowl. And I think he had like 180 yards receiving at halftime because he was just running go routes and they couldn't keep up. But kick it off to you, Tyler Higbee. I absolutely love Higbee in this game with Seattle. That's a game that you're game stacking. But tell me why you love Tyler Higbee, or maybe you hate him. I don't know.
Yeah, that standard too high discussion that you just had about Mark Andrews and the Texans, we can expect the Seattle Seahawks to run a defense very similar, and that naturally, as we talked about earlier, funnels some production over the middle of the field, pass catching running backs, tight ends, slot type wide receivers who are running those crossing routes, those upside inducing routes behind the linebackers in front of that kind of umbrella look that you would see in quarters, or that too high look. Seattle runs more of a standard too high shell. But yeah, so, and if we expect that this game environment could blow up, Higbee could be one of those pieces as probably the number 2 in line for targets for Matthew Stafford in this spot.
Nice. I agree with that. They're too high shell. If you want an example, again, I'm just going to give you guys throughout the show of the too high examples, what it means. Look at George Kittle versus Seattle in the second matchup, I believe it was, with Brock Purdy back there. The play design that they had, they were killing them with George Kittle and Christian McCaffrey in this one. Bobby Wagner's there, which I think will help out against running backs, but I'm not so sure he's going to be able to defend tight ends. And speaking of George Kittle, that is my guy for the next one because it's an intriguing matchup with the Steelers defense. I don't think I'm going to get much exposure to him because I'm not really paying up at tight end in week 1. There's a lot of guys that I like in the lower half, and even a guy that's on the other side of this game. But for George Kittle, The Steelers, I think, biggest weakness is their linebacking core and safety, not named Minkah Fitzpatrick. And with Kittle, they might need to use him as a blocker a ton this game because the right tackle is poor. But I think the Steelers are going to take the lead in this one and control the offensive side of the ball, forcing them to throw. And Brock Purdy's safety belt will most likely be George Kittle and Christian McCaffrey. I think that's the way that the 49ers are going to scheme to beat these Steelers. I think Pat P and Joey Porter have earned enough respect in the way that they're going to be playing coverages in Minkah Fitzpatrick that they're not going to be able to find that mismatch in those areas of the field. But with tight end and running back, I think that's the way that the 49ers are going to have to move the ball offensively against the Steelers defense. It's not a game that I love because I think the Steelers are going to be one of the not surprise teams. They're catching hype because of the preseason performances of Kenny Pickett. But overall, they are one of the best built teams in the NFL right now. And they just had an off season that I think they crushed, getting the guy from the Philly and Suamolo, drafting a tackle in the first round from Georgia, which is always good, Keanu Benton. And then they have TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith. The pass rush is going to dominate. However, in this one, they could be struggling against George Kittle. And he's just in an awkward price range where I don't think he's going to be very popular in week one. How about you?
Yeah. Yeah, this is an interesting game environment. And I would actually say that it is more interesting from an upside perspective than I think the general population will give credit for. And that's because, like, it's not just due to the successes of the first team offense for the Steelers in preseason. It's more of like who Shanahan is from a coaching tendencies perspective. He's typically taking what an opposition will give him. And if that means that if they are in a game environment where they are being pushed on the scoreboard, on pace, and whatever the case may be, if they're being pushed, he can match suit. Like, they have the pieces, they can shoot out with the best of them, but they're typically not required to because of what their defense has been for so long. So if we're buying into, I don't know where I stand yet. I mean, we've had 4 drives that were for the first team offense in Pittsburgh. And from what I saw on those drives, it was still a very, very vanilla offense from Canada over there. But I don't know if we're buying into Deontay Johnson just making plays over the middle field and extending drives, and George Pickens just coming down with everything that's thrown his direction. That could force Shanahan into this more aggressive stance. The way to beat the Steelers, at least over the last season and a half, has been on the deep ball. So that's kind of, it might be.
It's just the new corners, man. It's Porter and Pat Surtain. It's like, I agree that trend usually is a sticky stat when it comes to like Tennessee, but like Ahkello Witherspoon is now with the Rams, and he's probably starting there. And like, we like DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf gonna go ball against him probably.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, it's a new situation. I do agree with you though that like Pat Peterson just could be past his age at this point.
Yeah.
Like, he could get beat deep. He did last year with the Vikings, but he got beat a lot short for the most part. I think week one, Christian
just
Watson
got beat short.
Just
got beat everywhere. Just got
maybe
beat.
I don't know. The Steelers, I like Mike Tomlin, man. Just feels like you could just energize him and get him going. But
yeah,
I mean, overall, yes, I do think that this game could be a sneaky shootout. But man, the Steelers defense, they're real.
Yeah,
like they're a scary.
They dealt with a lot of injuries up front last year too. That kind of gave opposition the time to attack them deep. Yeah. Anyway,
but let's move on to the 4,500 down. You touched on Dulcich, so let's get into the opposite guy here. For me, it was on the other side of the field. I'll go quickly with Pat Freiermuth. 49ers are going to run a lot too high. As I told you, Huafungo was one of the guys in the middle of the field. When Kenny Pickett sees too high coverage, Pat Freiermuth becomes his best friend. Go back to the preseason game just a few weeks ago with the Bills. They get that interception. First play off the interception, he throws a 24-yard touchdown to Pat Freiermuth. He threw it to him, and
that was a good ball too.
It was a perfect pass.
That was a good ball.
Great adjustment by Pat Freiermuth, but those are split safety looks, and with the way that George Pickens just runs straight, and the way that Deontay Johnson can run these double moves, safeties stay split for so long, which gives the seam an open look, and Pat Freiermuth has shown that he can come down with it. Obviously, he made it a great adjustment to Kenny Pickett's perfect pass there and scored the touchdown against the Bills. This is a matchup for me that I think tight ends under 4,500. This is one of my favorites. And I expect him to be unpopular in week 1 just because of the matchup and seeing 49ers defense. That's always a scary one, especially now that they're, not scary. They're a team that's adjusting to a new scheme. They're still going to run a lot of the concepts from DeMeco Ryans with the maybe identity of Steve Wilkes, but it's going to take some time. So who's the next guy that you have in the under 4,500 tight end range?
Yeah, this will be my last one. Signing off after. No, I'm just kidding. Luke Musgrave, man, he's priced all the way down at 2,900 because obviously the pricing for week 1 came out before all the hype with Luke Musgrave. This was a guy I was targeting in 18th rounds ad nauseum in best ball. Now he's, look at best ball ADP, he's up into like the 14th and moving up further. So obviously a ton of hype. I wanted to talk to him primarily for the fact that I expect him to garner a ton of rostership for week 1. He's priced at 2.9 on DraftKings, so tight end minimum is 2.5, right above that. And this also brings up one of the discussions that I wanted to close with here. A member of the Washington Commanders that might not, or that could be going completely overlooked, bare minimum price 2,500, and that's Cole Turner. I'd expect nobody to get down to him because of this kind of, for lack of a better phrase, shit screen here with Luke Musgrave. Luke Musgrave is going to soak up all this pay down at tight end. But you have Cole Turner, who now has played with the ones in preseason. We have Logan Thomas, who's likely going to be out for week 1. And this is dependent on that, on Logan Thomas being out. But Cole Turner ran with the ones, dude, and he actually showed some downfield chops with Sam Howell at quarterback. So that's an interesting one to me. The Cardinals have been bottom 1 in defense against tight ends. Yes, they have a new defensive coordinator, they have a new head coach, all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, Cole Turner's a fun little name to be playing out down here at 2,500, who is probably going to be screened because of Luke Musgrave and the hype there.
I don't know if my roommate is checking this one out, but he is definitely gonna yell at me for that, you name dropping Cole Turner, because he's like, I want to play Cole Turner. Like, I swear to God, me and him have played college football DFS for a while. So Cole Turner at Nevada caught 10 touchdowns. Like, Cole Turner in Nevada was like a 6,800 player that played receiver. Carson Strong, Romeo Dobbs actually all played together, and he was a guy out there. He was a guy in college football DFS. He balled out on a few slates. So I will now have to talk my roommate out of it, but now I can't because of you name dropping Cole Turner on this podcast. So
let's go.
Thank you, Hilo, for that one. The last tight end that I actually wanted to touch on was Hayden Hurst. Rookie quarterback's best friend is usually their tight end, and throughout reports of camp, Hayden Hurst just has had a ton of looks. I don't think he necessarily has an upside to win you a GPP, but at the tight end position, you are looking for any point total. If you can get a touchdown is kind of the way that you're getting 2xing the value of Hayden Hurst just off the touchdown alone. I think this is a matchup where Hayden Hurst against the Atlanta Falcons, who are running a new scheme and different things. If the Panthers get into the red zone, you're going to see Miles Sanders or you're going to see Hayden Hurst find the end zone, because I don't think the receiving core is going to get it done. I think that Adam Thielen is a guy that could win in the soft spots, but I think Hayden Hurst in this matchup against the Atlanta Falcons will be the way that Bryce Young ends up going. I've seen a lot of camp stuff tweeted out throughout as a Panthers fan, and Hayden Hurst has been the guy for Bryce Young in a lot of scenarios, like third downs, red zone, and he's had a very good camp for us. I don't think the upside for Hayden Hurst is huge, but I've had a ton of him in best ball because of how late he goes and the fact that I think he's just going to be one of Bryce Young's go-tos in the money situations for the tight end, and in the red zone, that is the 101 of money situations. Hilo, do you have anything else before we wrap up this show?
No, just that you're a homer.
Oh,
no,
come
I'm just
on,
kidding.
man.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
You picked Luke Musgrave. I just realized that. But
no, I picked to talk about him to get to Cole Turner. That's why.
Oh, yeah. You had to segue it. You sneaky, you're cheeky. But
Yeah. Don't pay no attention to this stuff behind me.
no to the Packer stuff. But
Yeah.
appreciate everybody that's tuned into the show. Definitely feel free to comment any questions throughout. Kevin, I see you in the comments. Thank you for joining us. This is an early breakdown of the receivers and tight ends. We will have the podcast version up on Spotify, Apple, anywhere you get your podcasts. We will have it there. Be sure to subscribe to all the 33rd team content. Season's upon us. Next week, we will be talking about running backs and defenses, and we will have all the information we are going to have until the preseason or the season actually kicks off. Hilo, thank you so much for joining, and see you guys later.